In December 1995, a model of a sad-looking man was hung in a cage outside a Sheffield pub. But how did a farmer from Lincolnshire end up immortalised forever on a Sheffield street? This is the story of Spence Broughton, the man in the cage. Spence Broughton was born in 1746 in the market town of Sleaford in Lincolnshire. Broughton's father, like many others in the area, was a farmer. Spence naturally followed in his father's footsteps and started farming himself. Spence led a relatively normal life on the farm. He married and had 3 children with his wife. Spence Broughton had a job, a loving family, and a seemingly good life. But Spence also had some demons, which were about to take him down a very dark path. Spence Broughton had developed a gambling addiction. Ultimately, he abandoned his family and left them for the cockfighting scenes of Sheffield, Grantham and Derby. Broughton would spend his time attending cockfighting meetings where prized birds would be placed in a ring and made to fight until the death. Many of the crowd that had gathered would place bets on the winner, and that is exactly what Spence Broughton did. Now aged around 45 years old, Broughton presumably realised that gambling was not a sustainable way to make a living. Broughton met a man by the name of John Oxley. Both the men had very little money and formed a plan to rob the Sheffield and Rotherham mail. On the 9th of February 1791, the 2 men began their journey on the Rotherham Road through Attercliffe Common, where they spotted the mail cart on its way into Sheffield and laid in wait, ready to strike on its return journey. Riding the coach back into Rotherham was George Leasley. He was met by Oxley and Broughton close to where Magna Science Museum stands today. Leasley was dragged from the coach, where he was tied up, blindfolded and tied to a nearby tree. After a while, Leasley managed to free himself. When he returned to find his horse and cart, the Rotherham mail had gone. Spence and John made their way south towards Mansfield. The men found a secluded spot and searched through the mail for any items of value. They found a £123 bill of exchange and dumped the rest of the contents into the stream. Little is known about Broughton's exact movements after this, but Oxley continued south and headed to London to cash the bill of exchange. 2 further mail robberies took place in Aylesbury and Cambridge, and in October of 1791, Spence Broughton and John Oxley were arrested in London, along with another man named John Shaw. The 3 men were now imprisoned, awaiting trial for the Aylesbury and Cambridge mail robberies. But John Oxley later escaped from prison, leaving Spence Broughton and John Shaw to stand trial. After spending 5 months in Newgate prison, Spence Broughton and John Shaw were transported to York, where the trial would take place on the 24th of March 1792. During the trial, John Shaw testified that Spence Broughton and John Oxley had approached him in London, asking where they could cash a £123 bill. This firmly put Spence Broughton in the frame for the Rotherham Mail robbery. Things went from bad to worse for Spence Broughton when a man called John Close also testified against him. He claimed he had met Spence Broughton in London looking for John Oxley, who owed him a share of £123, which had been stolen from the Rotherham Mail. After a 90-minute trial, the judge considered all the evidence before him and found Spence Broughton guilty. The judge sentenced Spence Broughton to death and also to be hung in chains on Attercliffe Common to act as a deterrent to others. Spence was sent back to prison, where he awaited his execution. Whilst awaiting death, Spence reflected upon his life. He showed great remorse by saying,
"Surely I have greatly transgressed the laws of both God and man. In what manner shall a sinful wretch like me presume to approach the throne of mercy? My repeated provocations do now wound me to the very soul."
On the 14th of April 1792, Spence Broughton was led from his cell to Knavesmire in York, where the gallows awaited. Whilst being escorted to the gallows, Spence spoke his final words.
"I am a murdered man. I did intend to rob the Mail, but I was 6 miles away when the crime occurred."
Despite his pleas, Spence Broughton was led to the gallows and was hung for his crimes. After the execution, Spence Broughton was transported back down to Sheffield, where his body was displayed in a gibbet on Attercliffe Common, close to where the initial crime took place. During the first day, a reported 40,000 people turned up to view what would become the last gibbeting punishment in England. Spence Broughton's body remained on Attercliffe Common for 36 years, until it was taken down in 1827 by Henry Sorby, who was fed up of people trespassing on his land to view the grisly remains. Today, a permanent model of Spence Broughton is displayed outside the Noose and Gibbet pub on Broughton Lane. Whilst the model is not on the original site of the gibbet, it will keep future generations asking the question, who is the man in the cage?